Hello and good morning. Welcome to Mountain Standard Time. I'm your host, Nathan Giede, and today we're going to be doing comments and viewer interaction, as well as reading out some of the news and kind of figuring out what's out there. Wanted to say thank you again for tuning into us. We're not quite at our 40th episode. This is episode 39. Due to the stat last week, so we're one day off here. We're not in perfect synchronous for 333 all the time. We're going to be into prime numbers pretty quick here, but nonetheless, wanted to say thank you for sticking with us so far, and appreciate your support, appreciate your views, appreciate you guys making sure that independent journalism stays alive in this sometimes sad journalistic place, anyways, that we call Canada. We're going to start off with our endorsement, of course, of Resistance Coffee. The Resistance Coffee Company is based out of Weyburn, Saskatchewan, and they have this interesting idea that maybe if they do use a portion of their profits for anything, it shouldn't go to causes that are going to take freedoms away from you. So Resistance Coffee, they have a promo code with us. Let me just grab that for you in just a moment. And somewhere right here. There we go. And if you use your Resistance Coffee promo code through the Western Standard, you get 10% off of your first order from Resistance Coffee. So essentially, we take a portion of what they make and they put it towards increasing your freedoms, not hindering them, unlike a lot of the other coffee companies, and for that matter, a lot of other corporations who are all, for some reason, set on us becoming less free. Doesn't make a lot of sense. I think free people actually spend money more wisely and they make the economy better. So having a bunch of afraid slaves isn't really going to help anything, but whatever. That's just my opinion. So support Resistance Coffee and fight the good fight. So let's see, where are we going to start today? Well, I know that this isn't, I'm not a professor. I do have professors on here every now and again, actually. So Stuart Parker, of course, has got a PhD and that sort of thing. But I'm not a professor, and I'm not exactly the one to wax philosophical about a bunch of different stuff. But there is something I want to start with today, and it's a poem that's always meant a lot to me. And it got quoted the other day by actually Stuart on his Facebook feed. But I'd been thinking about it myself for a couple of days. So we're clearly on the same wavelength. And it's very short. It's only 22 lines long. It's free verse, and it's, of course, by William Butler Yeats. And so let me just grab it and bring it up onto the share screen here, because I really do believe that this kind of sums up where we're at right now. We got some problems. Ahem. The Second Coming by William Butler Yeats. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming, hardly are those words out, when a vast image out of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in the sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs, while all about it reel shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle, and what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of dreary stuff, make no mistake, but I think we got to be honest with where we're at with that. Things aren't going well. Things are going really bad. I didn't write out my opening statement so much this morning as I'm just kind of riffing it, but we're into that portion of what we're doing here right now. And I don't think it's much to riff, to be honest with you. I mean, we got the church fires around Canada, which are orders of magnitude beyond unacceptable or intolerable, but for different reasons that I think we're actually going to be able to put our finger on it. I need to get into some of those nuances in just a moment, but if I said there were going to be church fires somewhere, you would immediately suspect, oh yeah, well, that's going to happen in the Middle East. It's going to happen in that part of where sub-Saharan Africa meets Saharan Africa, because there's often ethnic clashes there along religious lines. You'd think that it might have happened in Southeast Asia, where there's still elements of communism and anti-clerical sentiment. You might think it was in China proper, not even for a church burning, but just a church emptying, right? They'd obviously have found a clergyman who wasn't conforming to the Chinese Communist Party, and they would have thrown him in jail with the Uyghurs, and they would have put all of his people in jail too. Maybe they'd harvest them for organs. You think just about anywhere but Canada is my point. But it's Canada that we're talking about. There are churches burning in this country. I didn't have that on my 2021 bingo card. And at the same time, though, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. Because, well, the fact of the matter is that some people are really angry about the narrative that's being put forward about the residential schools. We'll get into that in another moment. But I can understand why somebody's natural inclination would be towards violence. I can understand that. But the other side of that equation, quite frankly, is that you can't just have wanton destruction of things. And if someone is going to try and just destroy you, you don't just ask them to please not stop. You have to resist. And so here we are at the end of these things. Here we are into, well into 2021. We're actually on the bottom half of 2021. We're past midway. And things don't look like they're getting better. They look like they're getting worse, even as the lockdowns are lifted, even as the pandemic appears to recede, whatever one's opinion of the pandemic was. Clearly, racial hatred and angers and tensions and historical wrongs and old wounds are all being brought to the fore. And there we are in that ever-widening gyre that's mentioned in that poem. The falcon cannot hear the falconer, right? Round and around and around it goes, right? It gets out of control. The center cannot hold. And I especially like that line, the best lack all conviction, the worst are full of passionate intensity. We have to understand that if you have some kind of intelligent way or nuanced way of discussing what happened with the residential schools, or even a very simple, straightforward way, which just essentially says, I can't condemn the attempt to educate children. I can condemn that people abuse the system. I can condemn that people shouldn't have been apprehended, etc. But I cannot condemn that the central tenet that was, we can't let people go on into modern life without the ability to read, write, and do sums. We can't do that. We can't do that to our neighbor. We can't do that to our neighbor. We have a responsibility to do something about that. That simple, straightforward answer, even though it doesn't answer every part of the charge, it answers the essential question, or at least essential element of the question. You need to put forward that opinion as best you can in your workplace and in your neighborhood and in your family. And it's hard. I'm watching it tear families apart right now, same as the pandemic did. But it needs to be said. And the reason it needs to be said is that silence in this case really is violence, because the best lack all conviction. If we aren't going to put forward as straightforward as we can in a place of honesty and charity, this doesn't need to be about lording it over people. But we have to be very careful about allowing this other narrative to take over. The residential schools weren't Auschwitz. They weren't. They objectively weren't. They don't match the description of intent to commit genocide upon a group of people based entirely on their race, class, or creed. They don't. They don't meet that definition. Even on its worst day with the worst people in it, it doesn't meet the definition of genocide. And that doesn't mean that bad things didn't happen. And where those bad things can be rooted out, or the people who were actors in that can be found and punished, they must be. That's not a question. but we need to help pump the brakes on this runaway train that is lurching into insanity and is literally causing the burning of churches. So that's where I want to start from, that we are in the ever widening gyre. We are in civilizational decline. We can't speak to one another. We can't worship with one another. We can't discuss issues with one another. The center is not holding. That's why I started with that. The center is not holding. As we walk through some of the other issues we have here today, and another place where we can walk through some of the other issues we have here today, another place where we can kind of see that is, if I think we had the civil liberties lady show up here. I'm gonna put that into the stream just briefly here. I actually met this woman once. Let's see, where did she go? I put her in here somewhere. Here we go. I met this woman once. It's a different one. I needed the one that started with her picture, so we're all on the same page here. Oh, those are all ads. That's annoying. Oh well. Nothing we can do about it. Share screen. Chrome tab. Head of the BC Civil Liberties Group. I'll just use one of these, see if we can't get... Where's the picture of Harsha? You can kind of see her in there, but... Anyways, the executive director of the BC Civil Liberties Association is facing criticism over comments she made on social media in response to the burning of multiple churches in the wake of the discovery of human remains in unmarked graves at former residential schools. Harsha leads the organization which fights for civil liberties and human rights. She's also a longtime advocate for migrant justice, indigenous rights, equality, and economic justice. We have to remember, of course, that she was the head of No One Is Illegal, which is a pretty radical group that essentially believes that there's no such thing as being stateless, and everybody has a right to kind of, have a place to call home or their country. And so if they've become a refugee or if they've been displaced because of what's happening in their, get rid of this guy here, happening in their country, they have a right to go anywhere, especially to Canada. And I must admit, I have sympathies for that argument in certain respects. I don't want anybody to be a stateless person. I don't want people to be displaced, and I don't want someone to be at risk of violence in their home country because of something they can't help, or because of hatred or intolerance. Like, that's not the argument. At the same time, I don't think you can just let anybody into anywhere. And the reason you can't do that is for the same reason that the same reason that whether it's a doctor or a lawyer who doesn't want a whole bunch of dentists and doctors and lawyers to come from overseas and take their jobs. It's the same thing for the working class. The working class has a right to its work and has a right to its wages, and for its wages to remain steady and to not be eaten up by people from other countries coming over, flooding the labor market and making labor so cheap that you can throw a working class family out on the street and replace it with a family that doesn't have its heritage from here, that's willing to work for cheaper. And that's a danger. That's a real danger. And we saw that in the Trump presidency, that he was fighting that where he is. And in Canada, we have a very, very lax attitude towards migrant workers and how they're abused here. And that's wrong. So for me, it's not just about migrant workers being better taken care of, for sure, but it's also a question of who you let in and out of this country. It's you have to be careful around just letting anybody waltz in, unless you wanted to put them all on homesteading. I'd happily increase our population tenfold if it meant that they were all going to homestead and develop the land around us. Happy to do that. If we were going to go back to that system, no one is illegal. Everyone's a homesteader. That's what I'll start as an organization. Everyone's a homesteader. So this all happened. So 2 more churches have been torched in Canada. That, of course, is from Vice, because Vice would put it that way. And, of course, Harsha wrote "Burn It All Down." June 30, tweet was responding to news article, "Burn It All Down." The tweet's a firestorm on social media. Yeah, whoever wrote this had a lot of fun with writing it, because, of course, you could just say wildfire over and over again. Walia has since locked her Twitter account. Neither she nor the BC Civil Liberties Association has responded to an interview request. We should reach out to her and see if she'll come on this show, because I know who she is. I met her once. I'm going to punt this from the stream. So I met Harsha Walia once. I'll leave that up there for just another minute. No, never mind. I'm good. I met her once. I was at a student conference down in what was, well, I like to say Tsawwassen, but some people like to say Tawassen. Doesn't matter. But I was at the student conference, and what happened was I met this. We had all these. There are all these social democrats in the room, right? So here's the thing. If you're somebody who's a bit more to the left of center, and you're listening to this broadcast just for, I don't know, just for the kicks. I don't know. This probably isn't your channel. This probably isn't your show. This probably isn't your kind of content. But if you're left of center, and you want to have an honest opinion from somebody who's about as right of center as it gets without getting to be a complete reactionary and some of the other words you could use for those people, I'm going to tell you that it goes like this. So I'm at a student conference. I'm down in the lower mainland of British Columbia. I'm here at a student conference. We're right next to where the ferry terminal is. Obviously, we're on, I don't know, you could say it's unceded territory or whatever. That band is just figuring itself out when it comes to the ceding of the territory or having a treaty and stuff like that. I'm not sure. The point is that we're in Tsawwassen, and we're at this little conference center, and we're here to do our typical student things, which of course we're going to demand more services for less money from the government, right? We want more grants, we want education to cost less, I'm a bit of a wolf in sheep's clothing there for a couple of counts. One, of course, I'm a conservative surrounded by people who all vote NDP or Green or Communist or whatever. And two, of course, I went to a private Christian school that had nothing to do with this organization while I was going there, and still doesn't, because they're not allowed into that conference because of their values. And of course, at the same time, I was also sponsored to go there because of my heritage, thanks to my First Nation status. So basically, I was very much essentially a plant who didn't mean to be a plant, because I wasn't working for anybody at the time. I wasn't there to observe and take notes and figure out who we were going to take out next when they became a candidate for the NDP in the next provincial election or something. That's not what happened. I was just there, right? So. And I was there because I was the chairman of a student union up here in Prince George. Our student union at the college here in Prince George was at least at that time was pretty even keeled, because it has to represent tradesmen and nurses and dental hygienists. So it doesn't just represent, a bunch of people taking various courses that are being hyphenated, right? Studies, which are always a sign that your departments are dying. Don't have hyphenated courses. If your courses have a hyphen in them, that means that your entire department is dying, and that what you're teaching probably isn't real, right? There is a history of warfare. Peace studies isn't a thing, but the history of warfare is, or the siege of a particular town is something worth studying. So is the development of agricultural practices from the first agrarian period into, say, just before Rome, right? Those are things worth studying. But if you have a hyphenated course and a lot of it has various ethnic references in it, or cultural studies references in it, or gender studies references in it, like all that kind of lingo, that's a sign that your department's dying and that your university is on its way out. Anyways, luckily my university for the most part didn't have that. But where we're sitting there is, of course, we've got a whole host of students who don't have the values that I have for the most part. And I'm just sitting there in the crowd. I'm a leader of my student union. I'm just hanging out, having a good time. But what's interesting, actually, there's a good one. Sheldon Jones, glacial feminism. I don't know if that's real, Sheldon, but if it is, may God have mercy on our souls. So what happens is I'm sitting there, and we're in a room full of people who are all, for lack of a better word, social democrats. Interestingly enough, Aaron Eckman got up on the stage there at one point. He was invited because he was part of the BC Fed of Labor at the time. And he got up there and he preached the good word to everyone and, tried to rally everybody up. But of course, he was talking about workers' rights that didn't really get much people going. I enjoyed that speech, but a lot of other people didn't really care. And then what happened next was What happened next? And Sheldon informs me that glacial feminism is real. What happened next? Or one of the speakers, finally, I think the last speaker we actually had was Harsha. So Harsha, let's see if I can actually I can get an image of her up here. That way you can kind of see what's going on here. Harsha. There we go. She's labeled as a writer by no, we're going to use this one. Here we go. There's a good one. I don't know how big of an image we can. No, that's not going to work. We're not going to use that. Well, we'll use this. We'll see if streaming this, it'll just be a big enough image for her. Share screen, Chrome tab. I think it's the last one in there now. Harsha, Google search share. Okay. Can you see that? Yeah, okay. That's Harsha. Okay, so Harsha shows up and she begins to preach this absolutely radical kind of stump speech, like totally radical. Like we need to take to the streets. We need to transform this country. Like, history is built out of the blood and sweat and tears of those who wish to change it. Like it was radical. It was inspiring. It was energetic. It was full of passion and fury about the injustices, as she conceives of them, of the world. And I was sitting there, and I have to be honest with you, I was like psychologically, well, not psychologically, but at least intellectually kind of smitten. I was blown away that somebody could actually put forward these kinds of ideas in modern Canada. Nobody talks like this. No one talks like this. I'd heard reactionaries talk kind of like this in a few different instances, and I'd heard one or two progressives get here kind of somewhat. But this was somebody who was preaching the good word from her bully pulpit, explaining in no uncertain terms how she was going to change the world. And I had to give that credit where credit was due. And so it was interesting because I went up to her afterwards and I kind of rang her hand. Like I was like, I went up to her and I was almost an instant fanboy to a point. And I grabbed her by the hand. I was like, thank you so much for coming and speaking to us. And she's like, well, thank you. She's like, I don't think a lot of people are paying attention. And I'm like, no, they weren't. Like, I mean, these people all suck. I mean, they couldn't even hear me. They were so busy looking into their phones, and they do suck. And I need to be clear about that. Again, if you're left of center and you're watching this broadcast, if you're one of these people that just wants to get a job in communications or some other nonsensical department of your local municipality or your local provincial government or the feds, and really what it is you just want to work for the Liberal Party or the NDP party, and you just want to slough and slump and slouch and be kind of slovenly and just do a thing you get paid to do, that it doesn't really matter if you show up or not, and what you're doing doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter, but you want to be there because you need to get paid, because you don't want to starve to death, and you don't really have any principles, and you don't really care if public medicine stays public as long as you're not paying for it, and you don't really care about the poor as long as they're not on your street, and you don't really care about anybody or anything, and you just care about Netflix, and you don't even bother praying to a god and feeling guilty about what you're doing. Yeah, you're a waste of a lot of things. You're a waste of a terrible amount of things. I hope that your soul is compelled to turn back to the truth and back to the gospel, and honestly that you learn that we are made for one another, and we have to help one another. And just because you have a little orange button or a little red button or whatever kind of symbol you're using to try and show that you're a virtuous person, you're not. You're a sinner like the rest of us. And particularly in your case, it's bad news because you're very unaware of it, because you think that your participation in a nothingism is going to help anybody, and it's not. And so, yeah, I'm here to tell you that that's garbage and it doesn't work at all. And you need to get out of there, and you need to get involved with actually just, feeding someone on the street, or actually just, maybe asking some patients at your local hospital, hey, how is the care around here? What would you change if you could? Maybe it's your school board, right? I think Mark Stein said it that way. We're always trying to save the planet, right? Liberals and socialists are always trying to save the planet. Try saving your school board. Try saving your neighborhood. That would be my recommendation to you. Standing in solidarity and getting paid to stand in solidarity with a bunch of people who look like they belong on a diversity poster while you do nothing and have a meeting about nothing and no good results of it, you are part of the problem. Harsha was not one of those people, at least not when I met her. And that's not saying that I even agree with what she's doing. Certainly didn't agree with what she just said. But what I am saying is that Harsha came off as somebody who was not interested in having meetings for the sake of meetings or getting paid for the sake of getting paid. She sounded like a straight up revolutionary who was interested in changing the world. And that was where I must admit that I was very intellectually just smitten. Just like, wow, I can't believe that someone would actually say this in Canada. Nobody says this in Canada. Nobody makes points like this in Canada anymore. And so nobody has that kind of rhetoric anymore. And it's very rare on the right as well. So I go up to her, I shake her hand, and she's kind of stunned that somebody was actually bothering to listen to her. I think she's getting tired of giving these kind of speeches and whatever. This is a few years back. It was back in 2016. And I just say, well, I just appreciate so much you coming to talk to us and whatever else. But I completely disagree with you, but because I'm a conservative, but I really appreciate, I really respect that you came and spoke to us and that the energy you had. And she's blown away. She's like, you're a conservative? I'm like, well, yeah, I'm a conservative. She's like, what are you doing here? Like, this is like, like I'm left wing of these guys, but the rest of these guys are, pretty left wing. I'm like, well, I'm here because I'm a student. Well, not student union president, but a chairman, blah, 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 blah. Explain to her why I'm here. And she's like, well, if you believe some of these things you're talking about, we had a back and forth. If you believe some of the things you're talking about, why are you conservative? And I'm going to tell you guys, all of you who are listening right now and watching, the reason to be a conservative, or the reason that I'm a conservative, I'm not even a libertarian. I'm not a radical in many respects. I can be kind of reactionary when I get angry and whatever, but I am a conservative. And you know what the difference is between a conservative and everybody else, really? Is at the end of the day, they know it's the end of the day, and you have to go pick up the wounded, and you have to crack open a cold one. You have to sit back and enjoy your spot in life and have some leisure and spend time with your family. And it's not about the next rally. It's not about the next meeting. It's not about the next agenda. It's about people. It's about human beings. After the fray, after the melee, after everything's over, right after the battle, there comes a time. There's a time for peace and there's a time for war. And there's a time for mourning. There's a time for dancing. There's a time for sadness, a time for gladness. That's what it is. That's what conservatism is. Fundamentally, conservatism is a embracing of the fact that we are human beings and we need to improvement. We're sinners and we're not perfectible. But at the same time, we're also not machines, and humanity requires that we give space to that diversity of opinion, at least to go exist over there or over here, or to compartmentalize things a little bit and to create some demilitarized zones in life. Not everything is a fight. Not everything's a battle. And in the conservative circles that I walk in, I said it to Harsha this way. She's like, why are you conservative? I was like, you know what? Because they leave me alone. They leave me alone. We can't fight battles every day, all day, nonstop. I mean, life is a battle. Those of us who are Christians, and even those of us who aren't Christians, I'm sure that different faiths put it in a different way. Life's a struggle. Life is suffering. Life has many difficulties in it. And we have to meet that with honor, with virtue. We have to meet death as virtuously as we can. And we have to die to our selfishness every day. And we have to meet the challenges of the day with charity and humility. But at the same time, we also have to give that space for a human element. And I said that to Harsha. I said, I am a conservative because, at least for all of my own radical ideas of, maybe we need to do something about the housing market, and maybe labor should have something benefit to it. And maybe we should find a way to help, every woman who wants to stay at home and have a family. They should be supported in that. And every man who wants to go to work and support his family should be able to do that. Maybe that's the kingdom of heaven. Maybe it's that simple. And for some of my radical ideas around that stuff, the thing is that when I get into arguments with conservatives, at least at the end of it, the argument ends and they leave me alone, and they don't cancel me, and they don't fight me, and they don't find me, and they don't try to root me out of my home, and they don't try to dismiss me from my work, and they da-da-da-da-da-da. And she admitted to me in that moment, she's like, yeah, no, I understand that. It can be really exhausting being in this battle all the time. I'm like, yeah, That's why I'm not here. I'm not left wing. I have some pretty radical ideas sometimes. I completely admit that. I got called a socialist on this show not too long ago. But when it came to what was going on with Harsha, she admitted that, no, you know what? On the left, we do exhaust people. We exhaust people because of just how exhausting that can be. All right. Well, we've talked a little bit about the church burning stuff. We've explained a little bit about not necessarily my relationship with Harsha, but I mean, I did meet her, a couple of times, and that one time, and we had a good discussion. So wanted to bring you guys up to speed on that. Let's walk through some of this other stuff. So residential school survivors call for an end to arson tax on churches. Let's get into that. That's an interesting, complicated idea. We are going to kick that from the stream. Stop screen. We're going to grab our share screen and all right. Now I'm just I'm gonna prepare everybody. I am sorry that I'm about to do this to you. You know that I hate using this source. We all hate this source, but it's the only source we have right now. So we're going to go to the CBC. I know. It's a crime worse than any other crime that's ever been committed against humanity. But that's not true. I know that's a terrible over exaggeration. But the CBC is a crime against humanity, and it ranks up there with some of the worst crimes against humanity. So at least we're going to take a moment here, and we're going to take a look at what's going on here and see what's happening. So whoever's doing this, you're going to wake up a very ugly, evil spirit in this country, as Survivor warns. So group of residential school survivors is calling, I guess a group is singular, for an end to arson attacks on churches after several Catholic and Anglican churches were vandalized or damaged by fire following the repeated discovery of unmarked graves at former residential school sites in British Columbia and Saskatchewan. During a news conference Monday, residential school survivor Jesse Malcolm condemned the vandalism while fighting back tears. It's not going to bring back anybody, she said. Jean Allen Riley, a 60s Scoop survivor and the daughter of residential school survivors, said the acts of vandalism are showing discard between Indigenous people and the rest of Canada. Burning down churches is not in solidarity with us Indigenous people. Whoever is doing this, you're going to wake up a very ugly, evil spirit in this country. The Truth and Reconciliation Committee included a demand for a formal apology from the Catholic Church. While the Church has yet to issue an apology, Indigenous leaders are set to meet with Pope Francis in Vatican in December. That's true. I did look that up. That is true. That is going to happen. Pope Benedict expressed sorrow back in 2009, but Indigenous have called for Pope to go further by apologizing and asking for forgiveness on the Church's behalf. The Roman Catholic Church is the only institution that's not yet made a formal apology for its part of running residential schools in Canada, although Catholic entities in Canada have apologized. That's an interesting idea. Let's stop there for a second. So I'm a devout Roman Catholic. Oh, I'm delayed, am I? Is that better? Does that sound better? It must sound better because, well, that's the way that we always fix it the other time. So we're going to go back into Chrome tab. We're going to go back into the residential school survivor thing. Oh, I put this on silent. I did not. Okay. So let's get into this whole thing. Thank you, Sheldon. Yeah, thank you, Sheldon. Thank you, Chris. Thanks, guys. So let's get into this whole thing. Let's get into this whole thing. Yeah, you guys can always tell me when things are going wrong. Technically, I'm not going to be offended by it. Like, this is all. I'm going to be honest with you. Like, I mean, Aaron was getting after me the other day. He's like, "Wow, you really ran out of things to talk about, eh? You turned off the green screen, started pointing out where all the lights are and stuff, took away all the mystery." I like look, man. Like, maybe I did run out of things to say, but I also just wanted. It's all smoke and mirrors, and I have no problem doing, like, the pretentious I'm on TV guy thing, but I think it's important for you guys to know what is happening over here. And so to put it as bluntly as possible, we have a whole bunch of of course, that's what the CBC is putting up there. We're going to get rid of that. Can we get rid of that? Yeah, we can. Thank God. Okay, that was nonsense. we've got a camera in front of me, we've got lights everywhere and whatever else. But speaking of the sound being delayed, like, I mean, the sound is bouncing through like 3 different things to try and make sure that we have live sound and live audio. I think the simplest thing would probably be if we use the microphone things that are on the camera to do everything. But then we would need a pretty high quality microphone, and then we had to do this and we have to do that. It's a lot of pieces, moving pieces. All I know is that I couldn't do anything without my producer. I love my producer very much. He does a lot of hard work here. And if I didn't have him, like, this would be just doomed, totally doomed. So let's walk through a little bit more on the residential school stuff here. Oh, right. I was going to get into the Roman Catholic thing. Look, so I'm a Roman Catholic. I'm a convert, actually. And I'm also a person of indigenous descent, if you want to say it that way, but really I am as a status Indian. That's what I am. That's what it says on my card. I am a status Indian. Okay, so I love my faith very much, and I am completely aware of some of the things that went wrong in the residential school system. And some might ask, well, how do you reconcile those two things? Well, I said, well, you know, same way you reconcile car accidents or bad cops or, you know, bad leaders anywhere, bad people anywhere, right? The fact of the matter is, nobody thinks that everybody is corrupt, and nobody thinks that every car is going to explode on them and they can't get into the car. You have to, life takes a certain amount of faith at every step you take, right? Whether you're walking down a sidewalk, nobody thinks as they're walking down a sidewalk they're going to fall into a sinkhole. And someday you might, and that might be the end of it. And then somebody's going to get sued somewhere for not properly engineering that. And who knows? And who cares where that blame really ends in the end? Because you're not going to get anything for it. And I think that's her point when it comes to, you know, it's not going to bring anybody back burning down these churches. But ultimately, for me, as a Roman Catholic, my faith is extremely important to me. And I don't think my faith is inherently discriminatory. I think some awful people were involved with the residential schools. Not even all of them, not even most of them, but there were some awful actors, and those awful actors shouldn't have been in there, and they shouldn't have been moved around. They shouldn't have been hidden. They shouldn't have been shuffled. And yet we do this everywhere. This happens everywhere. This happens in the office down the street from you. This happens in the cubicle next to you. This happens to you at your church or your gurwar. This happens everywhere. This happens in your local police constabulary, if you want to call it that, your local school. There are bad actors everywhere, but we don't burn down the police station and the school and the office building, right? We accept that there are bad actors. We want them investigated and prosecuted and punished to the fullest extent of the law. I have said on this show in no uncertain terms that I believe in capital punishment for crimes against children. Absolutely, not a question. But this is where we're at, right? This is where we're at. So, I guess the simplest thing on my end when it comes to kind of the Roman Catholicism thing and the ugly spirit they're waking up in this country, that's actually something I'm going to get into in a moment here. Let's read a little further on. Prime Minister has finally condemned it on the churches. That took several days for that to happen. It's a shame. Indeed, something that will prevent people's solace. It's not the way forward. Toppling of 2 statues, Queen Victoria and one of Queen Elizabeth. The Manitoba legislature on Thursday. That's where Louis Riel is, on the other side, on the riverside. I understand your anger. We need to move forward as a community. And that's the end of that. Interesting. I will stop streaming CBC for a moment so that we can all just we can all recover from the trauma of having to look at CBC. I know it causes a lot of trauma, but we survived. We survived together. Don't worry. It hurts me too. One of the things I'm going to try and get into in my column this week is this whole question of the church burning stuff and some of the nuances there. So I'm going to do a couple of hot takes here and let's kind of roll it all into one as best we can. So my understanding is that the burning of churches today has nothing to do with what happened even 100 years ago. in those residential schools necessarily. It's not as direct as people think it is. I think there's a couple of different factors there. One of the biggest ones is that, did you know that from 2001 to today, so that's 20 years ago now, that's right, September 11th, 2001 to today, there's been far more violence committed against Christians and Christian churches and Christian houses of worship than against any other faith, minus the Uyghur Muslims inside of China, and of course some of the ethnic cleansing that went on in, again, the rest of the southeastern part of Asia as well. So, but as a general point, and certainly the thing that gets the most publicity, not because it, not just because, oh, they own the stations or whatever, but because of the wanted destruction and violence that followed Christian sects, especially throughout the Middle East and certainly into some of Northern Africa. The fact of the matter is that ever since 2001, it's not mosques that are getting burned, and I'm not saying they should be, but it's not mosques. It's not. That's not how it is at all. It's Chartres. It's these churches in Canada. It's the churches throughout Europe that have also been attacked, and the churches especially in the Middle East. And what's interesting about that is that at the same time that Christian churches have been attacked throughout the world, anti-religious sentiment went up through the roof since 2001. And so it's interesting. So that blame didn't get placed really at the feet of the Wahhabism that created that. Because again, I don't think that Islam is to blame for what happened. I think that a radical faction of the Wahhabis got in there, and they managed to get a hold of a couple of planes and do some really big damage and psychologically scar the world for the last 20 years. And that was rough, and wrong. And I'm glad that most of the perpetrators or planners of that crime were hunted down and killed. But the thing is that anti-religious sentiment started to pervade the planet, and then what followed was people began to visit their vengeance upon whomever they could get their hands on, and a lot of that was Christian churches. First in the Middle East, North Africa, etc., and then even into Europe, and now into Canada. And so what I think is really interesting is that, oh yeah, absolutely, this has to do with the whole residential school narrative that's going around. But there's something deeper than that, and that is, for 20 years, Christianity has kind of been on the run throughout the planet. It's submitted to China. It's not standing up for its rights in China. It's not keeping up with the underground church in China. It's allowed the Chinese Communist Party to infiltrate or affect the church. It's not standing for its values. It's not doing a good job of finding, condemning, and punishing those who perpetrate crimes against minors, against others. It's looking really illegitimate these days. It's not looking big, bold, and tough. Its members look complacent. They don't look like the people who used to take their Fridays seriously with fasting and take Lent serious with fasting, and even the pre-Lenten weeks with fasting. Fasting, prayer, and almsgiving are the weapons of the church. That's what Christ taught us. And I think that the church in general is failing to meet those standards. And so it's no wonder then, in a sense, that it's earned the contempt it has, and it looks weak. If you earn someone's contempt and you look like something they can just kick around, they'll kick you around. That's a basic fact of life. This shouldn't be news to anybody. And I think that's a huge part of it. The church has exhibited itself as someone who can just be kicked around and told off and done whatever to. And the biggest signifier for that, again, I'm not even saying that that those things didn't inspire this. Yes, the human remains found are a direct correlation to what's going on here. But deeper than that, right? Because we have to think about, like, committing violence. Like, think about what it would take for you to really think to yourself, no, you know what? I'm going to go blow something up. Like, really, like, think about that. Like, think about what it would take for you to do that. And one of the things that would take for you to do this, think, well, I need to know how that entity or institution or person treats themselves and whether or not they're even vulnerable to an attack that I would make. And you know what? I think the pandemic and the lockdowns and the fact that so many churches just folded and closed, just didn't even try to stay open, didn't fight the government, didn't fight for their fundamental liberties. Speaking of civil liberties, I was just talking about Harsha. they didn't fight for it. And who wouldn't want to denigrate a weak, contemptible institution that isn't standing up on its own 2 feet, that isn't defending its place in the world? It isn't standing up as the bride of Christ. It's down in the dirt saying, well, I'm sorry for myself, but at the same time, I don't apologize for some of the things that happened, but also I don't really care, and I'm not going to treat myself any better than this, and I'm going to put on this mud on my face like it's, like I'm putting on makeup. If the church treats itself that way and doesn't stand up with pride and ardor and have some gumption and some pride, some self-assurance, some confidence and magnanimity in its role and place in the world, it's going to get abused. You can't let yourself be treated that way. And it's not even turning the other cheek. It's not turning the other cheek if you're just face down in the mud. You're just getting kicked while you're down. Turning the other cheek requires that you are strong enough to have taken the first smack, and you offer them the second cheek to see how strong they think they are, just kicking somebody around. And you're looking them right in the eye, and you're showing them exactly who you are and what you are. And that they're striking another human being. They're striking a brother, right? They're striking somebody who shares, the same DNA as them. That's what's going on there. That's the strength of that push back through that turning of the other cheek. Just being face down in the mud, crying to yourself while simultaneously making proclamations about whatever that the people around you can't understand, that's not going to get you anywhere. And I think that's kind of part of it when it comes to the church. I have great deal of respect for the church. I'm a pretty traditionalist Catholic, but I really think that a lot of the scorn that's being visited upon the church right now is its own making. It doesn't seem like a strong, vibrant place that who would dare try and burn down a church, who would dare offend Mother Church, who would dare trespass her, who would do anything but, have respect and adoration and some kind of awesome fear. The old way of understanding awesome, right? To be full of awe towards the bride of Christ. And the church has, I think, lost this grip on itself, and she's lost. And so I think that's where a lot of this negativity is coming from, and how easily the church can be beaten up and dismissed. That's where it's coming from. These people fear no repercussion. Why would they fear repercussion? The church wouldn't fight for itself when the government came along and locked its doors for it. Every single church in this country, had they just told the government, nah, we'll be fine. Everything will be fine. It's not true. It's not true. Everything won't be fine. And we need to be honest with ourselves about that what happened with Mother Church and the pandemic and the lockdowns, and ever since 2001, let alone all those things. And Patricia brings up a good point here. Grace Life Church. Yeah, no, Grace Life Church fought its corner. I had a lot of respect for what Grace Life Church was doing. But if everybody had been Grace Life Church, we wouldn't be where we are now. And as an aside here, I should mention that at one point, we were going to go. We went, me and some people that I know. Actually, me and my beloved. This is how me and my beloved got together. Actually, we had taken a swing at each other a couple of times, and it didn't really work out. But in the second lockdown, we both knew that this was complete BS and we needed to do something about it. So we went outside of our church. And it's funny, right? Again, if you had told me 6 months ago that, you know how you were outside the church protesting their lack of action on the lockdown? Yeah, 6 months from now, there will be a bunch of people protesting outside the church about the lack of action on the issues around residential schools. And again, that stuff's up for debate, and it's a lot more nuanced than people want to agree. But what's mind-boggling is that there we were, me and my beloved, and we were saying rosary outside the church, and the church is reversed its position on this. But at one point, the leadership of the church basically told us that, and before we even got there, when we informed them this would happen, that, this is like, we might have to call the cops on you, and we don't want any trouble. We don't want any trouble because if you're causing problems for the church, we might have to ask the police to remove you for just praying on the steps of the church, basically. Well, really, we were in the parking lot, but praying on the steps of the church. And we were trying to fight on the same side as the church, and the church all but took up the position of the wolves in sheep's clothing, that they had been locked down, they had been abused, they had been told by the rulers of this world who care nothing for the next, who don't even go to church anymore, that they needed to close their doors. And a lot of churches willingly just did it without asking anything or having a second thought. And we have to understand that crushed the spirits of a lot of people. And that thing that crushed your spirit then all of a sudden is now also the perpetrator of some of these crimes. I don't see it that way. I don't think that's how it is. Those individuals need to answer their crimes. Anybody that protected those individuals need to answer for their crimes. But the churches, Claudette put it well. Most churches bow to the government. No one stands for their principles anymore, except for the few dedicated. And of course, Patricia has put this up there a few times. I will die on my feet before I live on my knees. Well, and of course, for those of us who are more religious, the dying on your feet happens because you prayed on your knees, if I might extend that quote just a little bit. Not trying to edit what Patricia's trying to say. I think she's right. But it's that time spent on your knees in prayer that gives you the ability to stand on your feet when you're being persecuted. But I think that it's really important for us to understand just how abandoned people felt in that moment. How abandoned those of us who were trying to be faithful to the church felt. And you watch that complacency and that complicity with the lockdown. That's not a problem, Patricia. You realize that complacency and that lack of effort and that lack of truth and that lack of honesty, and that our forebears and our martyrs, they were killed for the faith, they were carried away in chains, and many people in the church hierarchy weren't even willing to go in handcuffs in the back of a comfortable cruiser to go and sit in a comfortable jail and be fed 3 square meals a day, to go sit in a comfortable courtroom and then make their case. They weren't willing to do it. And a lot of us faithful weren't willing to do it either. And that crushed a lot of people's spirits. And so you see this weak entity, this old institution, this thing that is supposedly the most beautiful creature on earth, right, is the church, right? That's the idea, right? The most beautiful creature on earth is the church. It's supposed to emulate the maker of the world, the savior of the world, to bring his truth and love everywhere. That's the idea. And that entity, that body of people, are so divided, so hypocritical, and so lacking in consistency. Nobody can agree with them anymore. nobody can support them anymore. And I can understand how that might inspire violence and anger in people when all of a sudden, on top of all of that, what happened in the pandemic, let alone what's been going on since 2001, this other thing from decades past comes to light, and all of a sudden there's violence. Now, that's enough of me laying it on kind of thick to my own church and my own faith. I'm going to pivot now, and I'm going to explain something to anybody who might be listening who thinks that it might be a good idea, or that in any way, that somehow I have any sympathy for what's going on with the burning of churches. But I need to be very clear about something. And this is an important point for anybody out there who thinks, again, just referring that CBC article to a point. They're talking about how you're not standing in solidarity with Indigenous people if you burn down a church. And they're right about that, because most Indigenous people, if you want to use that term, most of us Indians are Christians, thanks to the conversion and what happened through colonization. And I, for one, am happy to be a Christian, because I've heard some of the theology or whatever spirituality of the old ways that things were for us Indians before the white man got here. And I got to be honest with you, I don't want any of that, because I don't want no final judgment. I don't want there to be no clear line between heaven and hell and that sort of thing. I like that idea. I like some clarity. I like the rules that come with the faith. I'm pretty happy that we got into Western Christian ideas and left behind the paganism of yesteryear. Nothing wrong with, I don't know, trying to keep some traditions alive and whatever. But I don't miss the pagan faith, and I'm glad that I don't live that. I'm glad that that's not my legacy, and it's not my heritage. Well, not my heritage today, not the thing that I want to keep going. But I will say this to anybody and everybody out there who is thinking to themselves, hey, you know what? This whole church burning thing's going really well. I should burn a church too. Or I bet you I could get more fellow natives on side and whatever else, more of my fellow whoever on side to help burn the churches, or this will help inspire solidarity, or more violence will get me more people on my side because we're the same skin color and because we're the same ethnicity and blah, 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 blah. So I'm going to explain something to you in no uncertain terms. We're definitely talking about increasing security around here at some of the churches. I've definitely volunteered to help with that. And I need to tell you in no uncertain terms that if I came around a corner and I found you with a bunch of spray paint or a bunch of, matches and gasoline, clearly, about to try and commit a felony against Mother Church, let alone private property, you are not going to get a good time from me. And I'm not going to show you any mercy or quarter just because you happen to be the same skin color as me, or you supposedly come from a disadvantaged place, la-di-da-di-da. The fact of the matter is that you are willfully committing a crime, and you're committing a crime against the thing that I hold most dear. My beloved, literally, my fiance, my future wife, is second only to the church and the faith and the God that she represents. That's it. God, my faith, Mother Church, then her, then eventually the kids. That's how it is. Funny fact, it's the same way for her too. So when I tell you that if I find you about to commit a felony or crime or violence against my faith in its physical form, which we call the church, you will be shown no quarter. That's the nicest way I can say it. You will be shown no quarter. If I have the opportunity to apprehend you, I will apprehend you. I will put you under citizen's arrest, and I will make sure that you are prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And if you personally injure me whatsoever during that altercation, I will then civilly sue you myself. I will put your name up here on the board. I will make sure that you have no privacy, and I will make sure that you and your community know exactly who you are and what kind of person you are, because you tried to do that unspeakable, unforgivable thing. You tried to commit an act of violence. I mean, people live in that church, right? They live right next to it. They could easily be killed. And you you visited upon those who were innocent the angers and crimes of those who were not. That's the unforgivable thing. Violence begets violence. And if we get into a point where I have to pay for the sins of my father and my father's father when I had nothing to do with what they did, we will never survive. Life will just become endless chaos and endless violence. Somebody has to put the stop somewhere. Do you want the church to fess up to the things that happened? Do you have a right to be angry? Do you want me personally, if you want to put down the gas and the matches and you want to walk right up to me and you want to scream at me personally for what happened, go ahead. Fine. That makes sense. But make no mistake. You will be shown no quarter if I am the one who finds you. So don't bother. Don't come, don't call. Right? Or better, come have a real conversation with somebody and really express your anger and explain in no uncertain terms. Don't go sneaking around at 3 a.m. with a jerry can and a Bic lighter. Come talk to someone in the morning, in the afternoon. Come knock on the priest's door and tell him how angry you are. Send an email. Go to a rally and cry about the things that happened. They had that. I told you guys about that the other week. We went out to Smithers, me and my fiance, and on our way out there, we were just going to pop into Rose Prince and say hello, which is someone who's never been elevated to sainthood, but she's an uncorruptible. But there were people there, and it was kind of nerve-wracking. I mean, we're the only ones not wearing the Every Child Matters orange shirt thing, and we're the only ones not doing all this other stuff. But we just walked in, walked to where the gravesite is, and we prayed. I think we prayed Divine Mercy, and that's it. And then we walked away. And I will say this, you can call various people cowards all you want, but there was a priest who was there. I saw him, I recognized him. And we walked up to him, we greeted him, we said hello, and he was there to try and be in solidarity with his flock as best he could. It was the old residential school site, it was LeJac. He was just trying to show that he cared too, and he was sorry too for the bad things that had happened. And could you imagine what would happen if he had gotten, been attacked by somebody there? He's just there trying to show that he is sorry too. And I feared for his safety. It didn't seem like a violent event or anything. I just feared for his safety. I just thought to myself, I'm pretty sure before the first church burning, just before. And I just sitting there thinking to myself, like, man, like, that's a brave guy. That's a really brave guy. He is here. And he is just trying to minister to the people around him. He's not even preaching out. He's not doing anything. He's just there. He still had his collar on. He had the orange shirt on. And he was walking around. And I gained a huge amount of respect for that guy that day. So, no, I think it's important to make it clear. And I think this is where the church should have been on day one of the pandemic. I think it's where the church should have been when all those churches were being burned in Iraq. I think it's where the church should have been the day after September 11th. Said, no, I'm sorry. I understand that everybody's angry, but we are not going to perpetuate anger and have churches burned and have anti-religious sentiment build. We're going to stop that nonsense right now. And we are going to do that which has to be done. Which is, we are going to build a better world by acting with conscience, with charity, with humility. That's how. So, there's one other historical point I'd like to raise here before we leave this question and move on to some of the things that are happening with the Governor General and the wildfires. And the one last point I'd like to bring up is the following. Sorry. Headphones are making me itchy. Again, to the question of solidarity among some of the Aboriginals out there, or people who maybe are agitating for these church burnings and stuff, I'm going to explain something to you that's really important. How did General Wolfe take Quebec? That is to say, Quebec City. He took Quebec by using Highland Scots who were trained in mountain climbing, mountaineering. They knew how to scramble up a cliff, given that they were Highlanders. And he used them to go to the rock face on the St. Lawrence that the Quebec, not the chateau, but the fort, right? The fort of Quebec, the walls of Quebec, right? Because Quebec was built like a fortress. To scale those walls and infiltrate and get inside of Quebec City and start the battle and manage to take Quebec City. Now, there's a good chance, that most of those Highland Scots were Catholics. A very good chance, because that was the difference between Highland and Lowland Scot. There were some Highland Scot who became Protestant. They became part of the Presbyteriate of Scotland, which is what the Scottish National Church is Presbyterianism, which is a history I'm not even going to get into because that's a very complicated list of things. Maybe we'll talk to Stuart about it on Thursday. So that's a lot of stuff to get into at one. But what really needs to be understood here is that Scots Catholics helped take out French Catholics at the behest of a Protestant king in England. Okay. And from the Reformation forward in the English-speaking world, most Catholics, outside of what happened in Ireland, and we'll get to that in a second, most Catholics were pretty conservative, and they stuck with the order as it was rather than bring in something radically new, even when it meant that they were still going to be treated as second-class citizens. Okay? Case in point being Roundheads versus Cavaliers, right? And when Cromwell finally gets thrown out, and then, the monarchy gets restored, Tory Catholicism, and for that matter, the kind of bizarre world where Catholics stand in solidarity with the institutions as they exist, or with the order of the world as it exists, and remain conservative, remain small change people, is kind of the world that I belong to. And I think it's important for those of you out there who think that this burning of churches is a way to inspire solidarity. I think there's a lot of Catholic Indians, to put it that way, Catholic First Nations, Catholic status, Catholic Inuit, Catholic Métis. A huge amount of the First Nations community is Catholic, certainly Christian. But the history of both Christian, but especially Catholic minorities or whatever inside of majorities that aren't necessarily sharing their values, or even against other supposedly minorities that are the same kind of category as them. The history is that we stick with order, and we stick with the institutions as they stand, and we stick with even with a bad compromise, a bad English king, a bad compromise. We'd prefer the bad compromise to the radically new one that could be so much worse. And I think it's really important for people to understand that. There's a long history of that. It goes back to Quebec City. It goes back to the French Revolutionary War. It goes back to the wars against Napoleon. It goes back to the Civil War in the States. It goes back to some of the choices that were made during the Irish Civil War, let alone what happened in the two great wars of the 20th century and various other moments. There is a long history of people who are part of the faith, the Roman faith in particular, but the Christian faith in general, even when faced with someone who supposedly racially or culturally is in solidarity with them across the aisle, across the trenches, across no man's land, on the other side of that gun, the other side of the war. The Western Judeo-Christian ethic has been, no, we stick with what we have. We don't just abandon whomever is on the throne today, whomever is the president today. We don't abandon it just for the sake of abandoning it. We need clear reasons why we would have such a radical change. And radical change often goes bad for us anyway. So if we think we're getting a bad deal now, the radical change may not result in a good deal tomorrow. So that was kind of my concluding thought on that when it came to the question of the church burnings. People who think that they're standing in solidarity with other people, they're not. And you're literally playing with fire. And you're not just playing with fire. It's very dangerous because, you know what? We don't have time for that. There are people love their faith and they love their religion, and the destruction of it by other people supposedly trying to free them from the opiate of the masses isn't going to make them happy. It's going to make them resentful. So that was a bit of a tangent, but that's okay. We needed to kind of get through some of that stuff. I'm just going to quickly take a look here. Wildfire that decimated BC town was likely human cause. Yeah, we'll do a quick jump over there. We'll get out of the culture wars for a second here. Talk a little bit about the wildfires. We're once again going to CBC. I'm very sorry. Let's try and suffer this as best we can. Hey, look, I could be one of those. It's an Indigenous journalist. I am already one of those, I guess. Anyways. Still under investigation. So there's Lytton. Yeah, it's right next to the highway. Yeah, that's where that turnoff is. Yeah, that's what I thought, but I couldn't remember. The BC Wildfire Service says that the fire that burned through Lytton, BC last week, resulting in 2 deaths, was likely human cause. Fire information officer came from within the village of Lytton. The specific cause remains under investigation. It is suspected to be human cause. The fire began Wednesday, about 100 northeast Vancouver. Everest, Canada, is 49. Yeah, it was pretty hot down there. Very hot down there. It's a nasty thing that happened. More than 1,000 people fled. The province said that includes most homes, local ambulance and RCMP detachment, caused by humans rather than lighting, common comments, unattended camera, sparks, power tools, machinery, weak infrastructure. Sparks from trains can also cause fires, right? So when a train is braking, it can cause sparks. Fire was caused by passing train. Response, of course, CN Rail. That's of course not something they're going to admit to because they don't want to pay for Lytton. I'm not saying they did it. I'm just saying that's a thing. And finally, not received any reports of railway comes relating to the fire. So we're into, we're into the question of wildfires. So I'm actually going to throw this out to the group. Hold on. I'll throw this out to the group. Is there anybody here who thinks that the wildfires are a direct cause of climate change? I'm going to throw that out there because I'd like to hear what is the pulse? What is the sense of climate change inside of our group? I'm going to level with you and tell you where I'm at when it comes to questions of global warming, climate change, global cooling, all the rest of it. I'm number one, the Earth's climate changes, and it changes pretty much all the time, but it especially changes through cycles of up and down, right? So one of the reasons why we have so many wonderful memories of the Middle Ages and so many terrible memories of the 18th century, right? We had a lot of wars in the 18th century and into the beginning of the 19th century. And so late 6th, 17th into 18th and then early 19th century, there was some rough times. The climate is always changing because we know that of the medieval warming period, right? They had like grapes in England, and like we have all these happy memories of the medieval age, not without Black Death and all that other stuff. But I mean, like, why do we have such a rich history from that time? Well, that's because there was food and there was benefits, and there were people running around doing things, and like it was easier to live because you couldn't freeze to death as much as you could only a couple centuries later. So, and so we're getting a lot of comments here. We're going to go to those first. I'll go on with my explanation a little bit here. So Patricia just straight up says, no, I don't believe in climate change. Brings in another one. Climate is always changing. Remember the dinosaurs. David Rashu says, no, doesn't believe in climate change. As climate change that we mean kind of the narrative of today, the narrative that we have today. I find it foolish to believe we as humans can cause the change, and even more foolish that we can control it. I would agree definitely with the second part. I definitely think our ability to control climate change is basically nonsense. And are we a factor in the changing climate? That, like, maybe, but I still don't think it warrants a carbon tax that does nothing. Climate change is an oxymoron. Climate has cycles, natural cycles. Yeah. Chris Marchuk, no experts say our contribution is minuscule, like 3%. I think the current climate change rhetoric is a retelling of Chicken Little dressed up in pretty language. That's funny. That's a good one. The Albertans commented a few times on here, especially throughout the religious question. Not really sure where the Albertan stands on religion. We'll let him talk about that another time. But I think that we have a consensus here, and the consensus is that the mainstream consensus around climate change is nonsense and it's bananas. And I agree with that for the most part. Do I think that the climate has changed? I think that the climate is definitely different than when I was a child, and I'm only 31, but I have memories of different kinds of things happening at Halloween. I remember snow at Halloween and stuff when I was a kid. It's not really snow at Halloween now. I remember temperatures being different in January when I was a kid, and not even like they've gone up or down, but they're just different. And again, it's the climate. Like, the climate has changed around Prince George. I've lived here for almost all of my life, and things are different than when I was a child. Do I think they're significantly different enough to warrant the complete and utter destruction of the economic system that we have? No, I don't. But I do have questions. And so when it comes to the issue of poor Lytton there, it was really hot. It was really rough. And I think that maybe, if for its own sake, if for its own sake, maybe the thing when it comes to Lytton is that I feel really sorry for the people who not only died, but for the people who had to flee their home, right? And that's all very sad. And it's very sad to have your entire town destroyed, and it's very sad to have things go wrong. And I'm not really sure what the solution is to those problems. For example, is the solution to those problems that, when it gets that hot, do we need to basically just be like, well, everybody be as careful as you can be, and maybe we should avoid having rail traffic for that day or those 2 days that it's that hot or something. I don't know. And I'm not saying the railway did it. I'm not saying that at all. It's all I know is that I wouldn't want to live through that myself. That's what I'm getting at, I guess. So regardless of how we reason our way there to the questions of how dry it is and how hot it is in British Columbia, or not anymore, but it was, and everything else that happened, the question then becomes, well, I don't want anyone to die, and I don't want anyone to lose their home from this stuff. And so I don't believe that carbon taxes will fix it. And I don't believe that me driving my truck around just because I need to go grab some stuff or help somebody move into their new house or whatever, I don't think that's going to help either. But, at the same time, I want to do something, right? I want to feel like I can contribute in some way. And there's been some important comments made along the way here. So Fort Mac was in peril a few years ago. Lytton is not alone. Take some better precautions. No, that's fair. Maybe there needed to be some fire lines and that sort of thing dug around it or something. Yeah, Burton's back. It is just as naive to say humans have no impact as to say that we have an exponential impact on climate. Truth is likely somewhere in the fence-sitting middle. It's fair. I'm not saying that we have no impact. I think we probably do. I just don't know what that means to say we have impact. I really don't know. I worked on the forestry suppression crew in the 70s, and it was the hottest place in Canada. Fires were normally started by trains or people wanting a job. Wow, that's pretty cynical, but not. I mean, maybe not wrong. So, yeah, fire suppression, that sort of thing. That was something else that actually came to mind. This is a bit out of left field, but I remember once talking to someone who was completely convinced that most of the forest fires, especially west of Prince George a couple of years ago, were actually set by terrorists, like people who were on a mission to cause a problem in Canada. And the best way to cause a problem in Canada was to just light a couple of trees on fire in the middle of nowhere, drive away, and things would go wrong. And I must admit, it sounded kind of crazy to me at that moment, but then you just stop and you think about it and you're like, well, actually, like if you were trying to cause discord and problems inside of a country and they had this abundant natural resource that went up in smoke really, really fast, really, really easily, yeah, that would be a genius move. Like you have to admit that that makes total sense from a real war strategy sort of standpoint. You cause a forest fire, people are running around, people are panicked, people are expending resources. It's going to not bankrupt the country, but it's going to cause problems, financial hardship, force people out of their homes, going to make people angry. Like it's a brilliant tool for dividing people. Am I saying that's what happened here? No, I'm not. I'm just saying that when Mr. Crazy conspiracy guy came up to me and said that to me, I was like, yeah, that sounds kind of crazy. Then you sit there and you think about it for 5 minutes. You're like, actually, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot more sense than like invading the Bay of Pigs or, trying to drop a bomb somewhere. It's like, no, like if you wanted to get people angry or messed up and affect a country, this makes sense. So, I don't think that that's what happened here, but I understand why people might think that and why people think that it's so drastic when it comes to this sort of stuff. So I threw out that climate change question. People have all kind of voted on it. Most of it was, no, we don't believe in the climate change that's being discussed by the mainstream media. There was another forest fire years ago that was started by a bearing packed in grease, of course, started on fire. No wonder the railroad has hidden the train to avoid any culpability in the courts. Yeah, no. I mean, obviously things can get pretty warm pretty fast when it comes to metal on metal and breaking and everything else. That's all pretty nasty stuff. Let's just take a look if there's anything else in here. So that was wildfires. Oh, there's something we can jump into right away. Oh, wait, no. We'll go take a quick look at, get rid of these guys. So I've got a lot of tabs open right now. So I just need a hand here. BC wildfire update. Let's go to that. Okay. Share screen. BC wildfire update. BC wildfire dashboard. Share. There we go. Okie dokie. Yeah, so I shared this with you a little while ago. Okay, a little while ago. It was a while ago. And when we shared that with you, this whole thing here, I don't know if you can see it very well. Can you see it? Yeah, okay, cool. Let me go back to that screen so I can move my mouse for you. This whole thing here, like all of this, like, you see everything that's in here right now? Was literally what, like, there was like 2 fires down here near Kamloops and in the southern Caribou in the southern interior here. And there was a couple of fires up in the Peace. That's it. I think there was one maybe near Vancouver Island or on the coast. Like it was nothing. There was nothing on this board is my point. Now we're at 214 active fires. There's provincial current year fires, 723 current year fires, 723 this year so far. And then we have, yeah, no, it's all kind of nonsense. Like that's crazy. That's totally crazy. 723, 214. Yeah, that was like 5 and 20 last week. Like, it was nothing. And now we've got all this stuff. There's a lot of there was a lot of fires now. So be safe out there. Please don't cause any fires yourself by accident. Please don't accidentally leave your campfire unattended or anything like that. And do try and follow the restrictions wherever you are when it comes to campfires. It's funny, now I can say restrictions and have nothing to do with the pandemic. One last thing, actually, we'll jump right back into that. Actually, no, we have something for that. Just a second. We're gonna get back into the pandemic stuff for just a moment before we get into this whole Governor General thing, which tells us definitively that there's going to be an election, because without a Governor General, you can't have an election. Some people are saying, oh, well, like the Chief Justice of the court can go and release Parliament. That's not what the Constitution says. And that should have been like straight up revolt. People should have stormed Parliament over that one. That's nonsense. Anyways, if that had been pulled off, I mean. Okay, vaccine passports ignite debate over privacy versus public health. All right, and we're back. Are we on the CBC again? Oh, for the love of God. I'm sorry. There's so much CBC today. I promise I'll go home and I will wash my mouth out. And we're going to do our best to get rid of this silly thing if we can. No, we can't. Being black in Canada, it's going to stay on there. How that has anything to do with anything, I don't know. I have black cousins. They enjoy being in Canada. End of discussion. As a steadily rising number of fully vaccinated Canadians emerge from hiding to test the gradual return to pre-pandemic normalcy, a conundrum looms. Man, who wrote this? Alistair Steele. Well, Alistair Steele is going to need to go back to academia, because that's a mouthful of a first sentence. And I love doing that in my first sentences, but I'm saying that's too much. As a steadily rising number of fully vaccinated Canadians emerge from hiding to test the gradual return to pre-pandemic normalcy, a conundrum looms. What to do about those who, for whatever reason, haven't had a shot? Striking the proper balance between public health and personal freedom and figuring out whether one must be relinquished to protect the other will become increasingly key as the country reopens. For a growing number of jurisdictions and institutions, the solution is a vaccine passport, a document the bearer can show as proof of immunization against the coronavirus in order to be granted certain freedoms. On the flip side, those who can't produce such evidence because they couldn't or wouldn't get vaccinated could be denied access to businesses, flights, and university dorms, to name just a few potential inconveniences. Aw, thanks, Mandy. Yeah, and Brenda, yeah, I get it. I do. I hate it. I hate it too. It's okay. But hey, at least you're getting your tax dollars out of this session with me. Vaccine passports. I have been against them from day one. I do not have the vaccine. I have no intentions of taking the vaccine. Neither does my fiance. And I think the simplest thing to say here is that I don't care if you got your shot or not. You shouldn't be in favor of a vaccine passport, because if you think that that's the last time they're going to put something in your body and then say, hey, now show me this, this card in order to go and have your rights, that's going to be a problem, right? It's like how you honestly don't have to even identify yourself to someone or anyone. And so, because you got a piece of ID, actually, no, you know what? You don't have cause, and I don't need to give you my ID at all. I don't need to tell you my name until you tell me what's going on around here. I'd like to start with your name, your birthday. Nope, sorry. I'd like to start with what the hell you think's happening around here and why you think I have a right to my name or my birthday, right? Like it. And if people had a little bit more of that toughness in them, we wouldn't be where we are today. But I don't know what that is with Canada, because I've met a lot of people in Canada who seem to be pretty tough people, and they're better at being assertive around this stuff than I am. I mean, my fiance is. She was raised by some working class people who are like they are good at drawing boundaries. They're a lot better at drawing boundaries than some of us privileged folk are. But Sheldon's got a good one there. Watching these CBC articles, I can almost hear the vacuum sucking sounds of money coming out of my pocket. Well, I can't imagine that having vaccines, I can't imagine that having vaccine passports is going to be a good idea. And I can't imagine that going very well. I see that going to the Supreme Court and getting knocked out, but we'll see how it goes. So for some reason, Manitoba, of all places, which is nobody's idea of a socialist paradise, except when it comes to their liquor laws, where, you can still buy a beer for less than $5 up in Churchill, Manitoba, when it should cost $8. Last month, Manitoba announced it would provide immunization cards to residents who have been fully vaccinated, allowing them to travel domestically without being required to self-isolate when they return. In May, Western University in London announced it would require students living in residence to show proof of immunization. That's where my buddy went to school, Western. Also in May, Health Minister Patty Hadju told CBC News that the government was talking with its G7 allies about implementing a vaccine passport that would allow immunized Canadians to resume international travel, while Quebec began issuing downloadable QR codes as digital proof of vaccination, but it wasn't immediately clear how they'd be used. Ethicists, privacy advocates, and civility groups have warned that such requirements threaten to create a two-tier society, benefiting those who have been vaccinated in Australia and those who haven't. As of June 25th, the latest update from the Canadian government is that Canadians over 12, 22% were fully vaccinated. A question of fairness. You have to remember that you're talking to a guy here who literally doesn't believe in the idea that somehow there could even be an ethics department, because, there is only one ethics department. It's called morality and approach the apprehension of a situation. Like, that has nothing to do with anything. It's nonsense. And yeah, Canadians don't need it. August. I don't know what that's about. So, in any case, the vaccine passport thing was a bit of a rant and a half, but I enjoyed that rant because, hey, Daryl's back. I agree completely with you on the shot and the passport date. We can't even use Canada as proof of citizenship in Canada to vote. It's pretty simple, really. Like, you can't have, like, the vaccine passport is nonsense. Like, it's just complete nonsense. Like, you still get service at a hospital without having a health card, right? Like a health card number. And it can't refuse you service at even a Canadian hospital if you are just a random person who just dropped out of the sky. If you're just some random person who just, appeared out of nowhere and you've got a hand wound or something's wrong with you, and you walk into a Canadian hospital, they're going to send you a bill for it. But because our system isn't free, it's fee for service if you are insured under our system. And if you're not insured under our system, you will receive a bill in the mail. But the point is that if you drop out of the sky out of nowhere and you go to the hospital, you will get service. So the idea that you need a passport to do this, that just makes no sense. And the Albertan has brought up something important here too. Yeah, the question is here is whether rights are conditional or not. Saying you have the right to X if you do A, or X if you do Y, means you have no rights at all, and that's totally true. Yeah, and Patricia makes the point that hospitals seem to refuse service to you even when you're not wearing a mask. Yeah, and that's all nonsense. So we're gonna punt this from the stream for now. Actually, we're just gonna get rid of it entirely. And just as a final point on the vaccine passport thing, I don't even really know how that's going to be processed here in BC, because to tell you the truth, like, it's like the pandemic didn't exist. That was the other point I wanted to bring up. I'm sorry. I got a little lost there. We've been through some bizarre rabbit trails here today, which is fine. It's all been to kind of the same point. Personal freedoms are eroding. The chance of living is going down. The cost of living is going up. But to this point, like, so I'm in BC. I know a lot of you guys are watching me from Alberta, but I'm in British Columbia, and it's as if the pandemic never happened. Like, I think there's still a mask in my car somewhere or something. Like, somebody handed me one once at a store or something, and it's still in there. But it just, this is where we are. Like it's as if it doesn't exist anymore. It's as if it's all gone. Like I walk around a store now. I don't have to worry about someone looking at me twice if I'm not wearing a mask. Lots of staff are wearing masks, but even some staff aren't in some stores. We're almost back to 2019. That's what it feels like, or early 2020. It almost feels like we're there, where I'm walking around, looking around, seeing things, and it's all nothing. It's like it never happened. And I guess the point that I'm making here is that if you lost the urgency, if the urgency is gone, then how can you convince people to take the vaccine, or to take a vaccine passport and walk around with it? Nobody carries their passport everywhere unless they're traveling. And we all know that we don't need to carry our passport everywhere. The only person I ever knew that brought his passport everywhere was a guy who literally never got his driver's license. So his passport was his ID when he went out to the bar. And he was a young-looking guy, so that's why he carried his passport with him. That's the only person on this planet who is carrying his passport with him all the time. Everybody else is just carrying some other piece of ID, or they're not carrying any ID at all because they look like they're of age to buy some liquor or some tobacco, or to walk into an establishment, or to just go do something. Nobody thinks that a 6-year-old should be wandering the streets alone of downtown anywhere, let alone Prince George. But that's just it. If you don't look like you're 6 years old, and if you don't look like you're 12, and if you don't look like you're underage, you're probably going to get pretty far in life without having to produce proof of your identification, your age. That's the same thing here. If you don't look sickly, and if you don't look like anything's wrong with you, why would anybody bother bringing a little card with them everywhere that proves that they're not sick? You bring cards with you to school to prove that you were sick. They're called sick notes. They're called doctor's notes. We don't carry little pieces of paper with us anywhere to prove that we're not sick. We bring pieces of paper with us to prove that we are sick to people, because it costs money to let you sit at home and not be at work. It's kind of mind-boggling. I'm going to jump right back into it here. And I'm going to grab where are we looking here? Ottawa spent $20 million on a COVID-19 tracking app with inconclusive results. I'll get up to that another time. Epoch Times. This is all Epoch Times stuff. It's nice to have Epoch Times stuff here. We'll use more of that next time. Let's stream this stuff. Let's get into our new Governor General. Share screen. Chrome tab. Here we go. So I don't even know who this person is, but I was just up there. You'd think I'd know who this was, but Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Simon, an Inuk leader and former Canadian diplomat, has been named as Canada's next Governor General, the first Indigenous persons to serve in the role. Yeah, well, we know what vote Mr. Trudeau is going for. Okay, let's start from the top here. Inuk leader Mary Simon named Canada's next Governor General. Mary Simon, an Inuit leader and former Canadian diplomat, has been named as Canada's next Governor General, the first Indigenous person to serve in the role. It's kind of incredible that that's the first Indigenous person to serve in the role, to be honest with you. I don't believe in race baiting. I really don't. But here's a hot take. I really don't understand why somebody of South Asian descent was Minister of Defense before somebody who was a First Nation was. That doesn't mean that I didn't think that Harjit San, right? Wasn't a competent person. I think he was, though he got now to hold the file of sexual molestation. Apparently there's all this sexual molestation going on in the military, and I don't think that's his fault. I just think that it's unfortunate he has to hold the bag for that. But the point is that I did wonder about that, because the military legacy for First Nations people is a very serious one. I don't know if any First Nations people ever got to the rank of colonel and that sort of thing, because that's what I believe Harjit was, the Minister of Defense. But I'd hope that there was somebody somewhere that could be promoted in those ranks, because that's actually one of the few places where I think that there's been a real clear connection from kind of the beginning of contact all the way to today. First Nations and military history and military participation is really important. So it's a huge thing in First Nations communities to have to have that. So I'm hopeful that someday in the not so distant future it will be a First Nations person who is made Minister of Defense. She's from Quebec, apparently, Claudette says. And the Albertan. Trudeau Sr., Jean Chrétien, the Liberals preside over residential schools, but Trudeau Jr. appointed the first Indigenous Governor General. Racism solved. Racism over. First one to fill the role. It is only by building bridges, bringing people between North and South, just like East and West, that we can truly move forward. Okay, well, that's a terrible saying, but okay. Mary Simon has done that throughout her life. Paving the path ahead. Today, after 154 years, our country takes a historic step. Cannot. He said Queen Elizabeth had approved the appointment. So Queen Elizabeth's already weighed in and said yes. Simon, who was born in Kingscoquellic, Juak. Yeah, we're going to have to work on that pronunciation. In the Nunavik region of northern Quebec. Ah, there it is. The Nunavik region of northern Quebec. Yep. Is the former president of the Inuit Tepriot Katami, a national advocacy organization for Inuit. Longtime advocated for Inuit culture and rights. She also served as Canada's ambassador to Denmark and the Canadian ambassador for circumpolar affairs. I did not know that. That's interesting. I mean, I don't know what you do as ambassador to Denmark other than read Hans Christian Andersen and sit around and eat chocolates, because they make pretty good chocolates in Denmark too. Really good pipe tobacco as well. And I guess pickled fish. But good for her. And then the circumpolar affairs thing, which I think ironically has China on it, despite the fact that China doesn't touch the Arctic Ocean. Simon began her remarks by speaking in Inuktitut and then in English, said she thanked Trudeau for the historic opportunity. She is honored, humbled, and ready to be Canada's first Indigenous Governor General. Her appointment comes to at a critical moment for Canada's relationship with Indigenous people. Ground penetrating radar located, blah, 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 blah. Of course, the whole question of the unmarked graves and former residential schools. Historic and inspirational moment. Long path towards reconciliation. She also sought to confront one potential contrary to the fact that she is not fluent in French. Based on my experience growing up in Quebec, I was denied the chance to learn French during my time in the federal government day schools. Ah, that's interesting. So supposedly it was racism that prevented her from learning French. That's an interesting take. I've never heard that one before. I should use that the next time that somebody says, well, why don't you speak French? Well, I don't know, because of racism. Yeah. Like, I should do that. That's interesting. I'm not saying that she's lying about that. I didn't know I was allowed to make that comment. I didn't know I was allowed to take that stance, which is not really true in my case, I suppose. But still, I mean, if you want to fake it till you make it, I guess. Based on my experience growing up in Quebec, I am deeply committed to continuing my French language studies. Chief Justice Wagner will be fulfilling the governor's duties as administrator, but need to appoint replacements to become more pronounced. Recent week signs increasingly point Liberals to signing an election this summer or fall. So, here we are. Trudeau's question nearly from the start after the Prime Minister abandoned the formal panel to previous Conservative government to make advisory. Yeah, so that was Payette, talking to Payette. So Payette, right? So, and that's the other part of this whole story, of course, is Payette. So, welcome to Critical Race Theory. Thank you, Sheldon. Patricia, can I do that too? Yeah, of course you do. And John, of course, helping me know why this matters. This is why we have John. John's on the show tomorrow to help us understand these things. We have a running territorial dispute with Denmark over ownership of an unoccupied island in the high Arctic. That's a good point. Maybe if we ever build any of those ships and actually ice break our way there and then put some of our, somewhat badly equipped troops on there, because we do a terrible job equipping people in our military because we have no self-respect as a country, maybe then we can fix that problem. Oh, the producer fixed my mic issue. Isn't that nice? Is there gold or oil there? That's valid question, Patricia. Yeah, don't tell the Americans. Anyways, let's get back into this now. So we've got this new governor general, and of course, our old governor general was a train wreck. You know what our old governor general was? Our old governor general was, not to make light of that situation, but our old governor general was a train full of dumpsters on fire headed towards a petroleum factory that also happened to be having a fireworks party. That's what that was. Okay. It was an absolute train wreck. It was a dumpster fire that made dumpster fires look envious. So she was a terrible governor general. Of course, she was a terrible choice for governor general. She had killed somebody with her car by accident, but nonetheless, she had had this manslaughter moment, whatever, this accidental vehicle use causing death or whatever, which wasn't a good start. I'm sorry, but there are just some things in life, like, it's not saying that you can't be forgiven for it, but there are really some things in life where, I mean, if you're going to be especially symbolic, I'm not saying you can't be an elected official at that, but if you're going to be the symbol of all that's Canada, maybe that's not it. Also, the terrible divorce that had happened with her husband and some of the issues that had happened there. And finally, the fact that, I mean, at this point, she's out of office. So the well-rumored fact, the well-discussed backstory that she did have somebody who she was deeply devoted to in a romantic sense, who, was of the same gender and was around and was more interested in spending time with her and not doing her job. So that was widely discussed, let alone the psychological abuse she was heaping upon her staff, let alone the fact that she had an axe to grind against religion, right? That came out in one of her speeches about science or something at some stupid party somewhere. Like, these are all things that we all know now, right? And we're allowed to say it because she's getting paid by my tax dollars, whether I say them or not. And she doesn't know who I am. She doesn't care what I think because she's getting paid to be a piece of bleep anyways. Like, she doesn't care. That was always the thing about criticizing the elites. They could really do some crocodile tears because they really, they don't care, right? Like, I mean, they get paid either way. That's the thing about the protected class. They get paid either way. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that Julie Payette was the worst possible governor general that you could have had of all time, outside of some of the tyrants of the 20th century, but at least they would have been competent at being tyrants. She wasn't even a good tyrant. So the point is that she's out of the picture. Thanks be to God. She doesn't deserve her pension, obviously, because she's a complete waste of air, time, and space. Maybe she could go back up to space and just swing around the planet for a while, not bother us. We'll just leave her in the space station. She can do research or something or talk to plants. I don't care. The point is, she doesn't matter, and she was irrelevant, and she wasn't a good governor general. May God have mercy on her soul. And may she give all of her money to charity. Maybe that would be her redemption. Then what we've got on now is that we've been running without a governor general for months, right? For months, we haven't had a governor general. And that's not okay, because whatever you think about vice-regal appointments and all that garbage, the point is that it doesn't matter where you stand on that stuff. I'm a monarchist. If you aren't, that's fine. But the point is that you can't run a government not according to its own rules. The rules say this is who's supposed to be in charge. And if you don't have that in your government, then you don't have a government. Right. And I mean, somebody made this point about some of Trump's cabinet. Did they even have a cabinet anymore that was appointed by the president and then confirmed by the Senate? They had some valid arguments there. Some very valid arguments that, a lot of Trump's cabinet was no longer approved by the Senate. They were all acting directors that he had to kind of appoint by fiat, right? Or when the Senate was in recess. But the point is this. We have Julie Payette. She's gone. And now we have, I just exited out of Mary Simon, which is funny. It's kind of almost it's almost not cartoonish. I don't mean that in a negative way, but that's an Aboriginal name that sounds like somebody made it up, like Paul George almost. Like, I mean, there's, for us Aboriginals, there's a lot of us who have first and last names that are both first names, right? And last names that are first names, kind of thing. So I could be kind of cynical about that, but I'll let that be. The point that I'm trying to drive home here is that we've got this first Indigenous Governor General, and honestly, considering how completely awful Payette was, it really doesn't matter. Like you could have had a 14-year-old who stares into her phone all day. She would have been a better governor general than Julie Payette. So I'm actually happy with this appointment to a point. I mean, obviously, because she was appointed by the Liberals, she is a Liberal, right? Only a conservative government would ever survive with a Liberal appointee, as Harper did with Michel Jean. I thought Michel Jean actually did quite well in the role, especially considering Afghanistan and everything else that was going on at the time. I think Michel Jean actually did a great job in the role. I don't know what other people think about that, but I thought she did a pretty okay job. And only a conservative prime minister can work with a Liberal appointee. And Harper did a great job working with her, and she worked really well with him. And then, of course, you got David Johnston in there to try and get some semblance of order back into the office and put some more regality to it. And then he went and wrote a book about, he wrote a book about how we could improve this country, which sounded exactly like what the son of privilege would write about how to improve this country. I lost a lot of respect for David Johnston as I attempted to read his book. It wasn't like he hadn't put anything important in it or smart in it or whatever. Like it just, he really is the son of privilege. He's an Ontarian, and of course everything that comes out of Ontario is hard to stomach because it's from Ontario. But he really was. He's just the son of privilege. He was a waspy, privileged individual who went on to play at some of those all-star places in the East Coast, the Ivy Leagues, and he'd been a reader for his church, whatever. He just sounded like the all-Canadian, all-star sort of sign of guy, and that's fine. I'm not saying you can't be those things, but he certainly wasn't coming from a place of solidarity with the underclass. And he wasn't even a kind of disinterested aristocrat saying, well, let the peasants eat their bread and whatever. But I certainly wouldn't want to rule my peasants to such a point and hurt them to such a point that they rebel against me and have my head. Like, well, come on. Like, I'd like to live this life just fine. He didn't even have that kind of going for him. It was kind of those, it felt smarmy. And just, yeah, I lost a lot of respect for David Johnston as a writer of that book, not necessarily as our governor general. But we have Mary Simon. I think she'll be competent in the role, to be honest with you. I don't think she's going to be incompetent. And you have so much staff to help you with it. It's not as if she's not president of Canada, right? Like she doesn't have to worry about what the nuclear launch codes are. This isn't America. She gets to sit in a nice house. She gets to greet ambassadors. She was an ambassador herself. That helps. The fact that she was an ambassador, she knows how to deal with ambassador stuff, international relations stuff. And she'll tour around, and she'll be the first Aboriginal one, and she'll be a good token that way. I don't think that's what the role is for. I agree with the Albertan here. I care not for names. I care for competence and humility. That's fine. I can completely agree with you there. But they have a role to fill. And I'm going to end on this point, actually. And this is something that I've always kind of believed. I've always had a different attitude toward this stuff than a lot of other people. Maybe it's because I'm a monarchist. I really don't believe in being perfectly prepared for anything in life or a position in life or anything like that. I don't believe it exists. In the end, you have the stones to make it or you don't. Grace builds on nature is a line we use inside of my faith all the time. If you don't have what it takes to be a priest just by your natural state, it's not just about celibacy and that sort of. I just mean like what it takes to be that loving, caring person who's supposed to personify God. You're not going to make it no matter how much formation you have. And the same thing happens with being a husband. The same thing happens with being a doctor. The same thing happens with being a pipe fitter, for that matter, to a certain extent. It's like grace builds on nature. You have these natural talents that God already gave you. And that's got to be the 80% threshold or the B plus threshold, whatever, A minus B plus threshold. It's got to get you there. It's got to get you past the passing grade. And then you kind of build from there. Right? So you need that impetus, what starts there, the raw material being pretty good raw material, and then you can direct it somewhere. What I see with Mary Simon is whatever else, yeah, she'll be a Liberal through and through, and she's a part of the elite class and everything else. She is from that place up north. Hopefully her background gives her some solidarity with people. And I am hopeful that she will act in a way that helps us move forward as a country. I don't care for this government. I don't care for a lot of its appointees. This is a better choice than Julie Payette. But then again, like a cardboard box with suggestions in it was a better idea than Julie Payette. So I'm glad that's over. And I'm glad that we're able to move forward. And we will discuss the election another time, maybe even later this week. But that is the end of today's show. To try and keep things timely, I'm not even going to bother with the email or anything like that. You guys know the email. You know who I am. Send me a message if you need to. Thank you so much for watching today. And we'll be back again tomorrow, 9 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Mountain.